När ett barn blir allvarligt sjukt behöver du hantera en ny vardag. Men det finns stöd att få. Ronald McDonald Hus ger familjer möjligheten att bo tillsammans medan barnet vårdas på sjukhus. Vill du ge fler familjer samma möjlighet? Swisha till 970 22.
Today I'm speaking with Brendan O'Neill, who's the chief political writer at Spiked. And he was the editor at large there for 15 years between 2007 and 2021. And he also hosts a weekly podcast called The Brendan O'Neill Show, which I highly recommend. And he's also an author. And his latest book is called A Heretic's Manifesto. And it's a great book. And it's about what one could call the great awakening or the political correctness of our time, and it concerns all those issues that are central to what is called the culture wars. And Brendan is one of those few people who can approach serious subjects but still with good humor. So don't be surprised if you laugh when you read it. And today we mainly focus on the issues concerning the trans, sex, gender, and Islam censorship, white shame, the race issue, and also freedom of speech and freedom of opinion and why that is central to an enlightened democracy. And Brendan makes a very strong case, and going back historically with historical examples and parallels for why that is. So I highly recommend the book, and I hope you enjoy the interview. You're listening to Rak Höger with me, Ivar Arpi. Welcome, Brendan O'Neill, to Rak Höger.
Ivar, it's a pleasure to be here.
And you pronounce my name very well, so I'm very glad that you're not a racist, because it's a microaggression to not pronounce one's name correctly. You written, we met briefly during Engelsberg's seminariet, which is Axon Johnson Foundation holds like a seminar and invites intellectuals from all over the world, and then they also invite us peasants from the local environment to like bask in the glow of your great intellects. And we had a chance to sit down and talk a lot, and it was great, I think. But it was pre-COVID, I think.
It was pre-COVID, yeah. It was BC, before COVID, back when things were relatively normal. Yeah, it feels like a whole lifetime ago now.
Yeah, it actually does. It's strange. I actually, like when we met, I was sort of skinny, and then I became fat, and now I've become skinny again. So now we haven't seen each other in a while. But so if you could just like, I added 30 kilos and then I lost 30 kilos again. So,
wow.
So nothing has happened basically in my life.
Well, you look great. I know the listeners can't see you, but you look fantastic. So well done. Up and down, but you're now back to a kind of happy plateau. That's good.
Yeah, happy plateau. Yeah, no muscles, but I'm skinny. And you written a new book, which has great title. It's a Heretic's Manifesto. And I mean, it's the vision of a heretic. I think we're going to get into the definition of a heretic, but you start the book by saying, lately I have found myself agreeing with the people who say cancel culture is a myth. That's one of the debates I've been embroiled in here in Sweden, because I've spoken about cancel culture. So it's a very provocative, like, first sentence. What do you mean by that? And I mean, you developed that in the book, but I mean, could you do it here?
Yeah. So, I mean, really, I think cancel culture is real. I mean, it's obviously real. People get cancelled all the time for saying things that are perfectly normal and reasonable, like women don't have penises, for example. You can be cancelled for saying that. There's an Irish singer called Roisin Murphy who's currently being cancelled in the UK, or they're trying to cancel her because she said we shouldn't give kids puberty blockers, those very strong hormones that prevent children from going through one of the most natural experiences of the human life. And for that, people have got the pitchforks out. They're lighting their torches. They want to ban her concerts. They want people to stop buying her album. It's not working. She's almost at number one, but they want to cancel her. So obviously, cancel culture exists. But the point I make in that introduction is that it's too light a term. It's too fuzzy to describe the seriousness of what we face today, which is not simply that people get cancelled every now and then for saying normal, reasonable things, but also I think we're living through a counter-enlightenment. We're living through all-out war on reason and truth and objectivity. And I just think cancel culture as a phrase sounds too quaint. I had the same feeling about the phrase nanny state. I always hated the phrase nanny state because it
sounds kind of nice.
It made the state sound, funny, like Mary Poppins, some kind of amusing nanny who just wanted to put a spoonful of medicine in your mouth. That's the nanny state, when in fact I thought it was a marauding beast of bureaucracy that was invading almost every area of the individual's life. And so it just felt like too much of a quaint. And I now feel the same about cancel culture. It's a useful term. I don't want to be precious about it. People understand what cancel culture means. It connects with the public. They know what you're talking about when you say cancel culture. So it's a useful democratic phrase, and I will still keep using it. But I think we need a broader understanding of just how serious the crisis of freedom and truth is right now.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point that you make, and I think it's a good introduction to the book because, as you say, it's like, to use a worn-out metaphor, it's the tip of the iceberg, basically, the cancellations. And what I've found when I argue for the existence of a cancel culture is that you can the people on the opposing side say, okay, who are the ones who were cancelled?
Yeah.
And of course, there are cancellations in Sweden and elsewhere, but they are often the ones that are publicized are, of course, fewer than all the cases where people are just self-censoring.
Yeah.
And they're not being cancelled really because they don't allow themselves to put themselves at risk because they know that there will be consequences.
Yeah.
And then the cancel culture concept sort of acknowledges that, but it can be distracting to the wider counter enlightenment movement. I agree. I mean, you brought up a woman's penis. You have the chapter that follows on the introduction is called it's about trans issues, and you have a brilliant first sentence there as well. We need to talk about her penis. Why do we need to talk about her penis?
It's funny because when I decided I was going to do a book called A Heretic's Manifesto, and the subheading is Essays on the Unsayable, I knew from the very start, when it was in my mind, I knew that the first chapter would be called Her Penis. I knew that the first line of the book would be, we need to talk about her penis. I knew from the very beginning. I probably had that first line even before I had the idea for the rest of the book and the title, A Heretic's Manifesto. So it was there from the very start. And that was nice because I find opening lines very difficult. Sometimes, you will know this as a writer, you can spend a lot of time on the opening line and the opening paragraph. They can be often the most difficult thing to write. So I was pleased that that line burst into my mind. I think it was the reason I opened with we need to talk about her penis is because we really do need to talk about her penis. We need to talk about the fact that those two words are now often put together, a penis. Because if you had said her penis 10 years ago, people would have laughed at you. If you'd said it 100 years ago, you'd have been put in a lunatic asylum. So I'm interested in how it became an acceptable phrase. I'm interested in how language is altered and engineered in order to, as I make the case in the book, in order to engineer thought. And I think her penis is such a perfect example of that. The fact that you will see that term, her penis, not only in trans propaganda and trans literature, but on the BBC, in the Times newspaper, the newspaper of record here in the UK. You see it in courts of law. There have been court cases in Britain, one including a man who identifies as a woman who was accused of rape and found guilty of rape. And in the court of law, they said she took out a penis. That's what they say about this male rapist. This is a court where everyone swears to tell the truth, and yet they are lying. They are saying that this man is a woman, and they're saying that they're saying her penis. So I'm interested in the way in which, right at the very top of our society, people will say her penis. I think it's indicative of the speed and tyranny with which language can be changed in order to serve an ideological agenda. In this case, the ideological agenda of transgenderism, the idea that there's no such thing as sex, that sex is fluid, that you can change sex. I quote George Orwell quite a lot in the book because one of his great concerns, which was the key concern of 1984, is that control of language is usually designed to control thought and to control how we conceive of ourselves and how we conceive of our place in the world. And I think the trans issue is a perfect example of that right now.
And you bring up in the book what's happening in 1984. One of the Winston, the main character, his job is to rewrite past news articles to be more in line with current propaganda. And you make a comparison with how I forget now in which country it is, but you can change the record of the sex that you were born with, so that you actually change history. If you search the archives, you're not going to find the truth. You're going to find because you airbrush the history then, and then you get. Of course, it in an equality sense, it's great. You're going to have more female rapists, so it's a yay for equality.
Yeah,
but it's sort of it's a great comparison.
Yeah, it's that country is Ireland. I'm speaking to you from Ireland now, as it happens, and Ireland has been completely colonized by the trans ideology. It's extraordinary. Ireland has become one of the most woke states in Western Europe. It's like it's gone from being a Catholic country to a woke country, from one religion to another. And in fact, both of those religions treated women very badly. Catholic Ireland notoriously treated women badly, and so does trans-friendly Ireland as well. It puts rapists in women's prisons, which is a threat, obviously, to women's safety. And it does various other things as well. So, yeah, I'm speaking to you from Ireland, and Ireland is the country in which you can now change your birth certificate to reflect your supposed new sex, or the sex that people fantasize that they are. And that is the falsification of a historical document. Because, you know, when that nurse said in 1985 or whenever the person was born, this is a boy, she was telling the truth. And when the registrar logged it on that piece of paper, this is a boy and he was born on such and such a date and these are his parents, he was telling the truth. He was writing down a factual truth that is important for society to know. It's important to know who's being born, how many boys are being born, how many girls are being born. This is incredibly important information. But you can now go back in time and falsify your birth certificate so that it will say a girl was born on that day and her parents, her birth date, etc., etc. So that is incredibly Orwellian, because that is the rewriting of a historical document to suit contemporary ideology. And that's exactly what happened in 1984. As you say, Winston Smith worked at the Ministry of Truth, and one of his key jobs was to amend old newspaper articles so that they better accorded with contemporary ideology and contemporary beliefs. And that's happening as well. Another example I give in my book is of a story that appeared in the New York Times a couple of years ago, and it was on the BBC as well here in the UK, about a woman in her 80s who murdered and decapitated another woman, a woman who was in her 60s. And I remember reading this thinking, that's very unusual. I don't think I've ever heard of a case of a woman in her 80s murdering and decapitating someone. I can't
it's
ever
a lot of
remember
energy.
anything.
I mean, it's sort of
Yeah.
impressive. Like she's not going quietly into that good night. I mean, she's have enough energy to commit a murder. That's I mean, it takes a lot of effort also to cut someone's head off. It's
Right.
yeah.
This is clearly a big, strong 85-year-old woman. You know, who knew that they had it in them? Of course, you get halfway through the New York Times article and it says it's a trans person, i.e. it's a man. You get to the very last line of the BBC article, the very last line. Not everyone makes it to the last line of a news article. They read the first couple of paragraphs and then they move on. The very last line of the BBC article said this is a trans identifying person, i.e. it's a man. So they're lying to us. The mainstream media is lying to us. It is not true that a woman in her 80s murdered and decapitated another woman. It's not true. It's false. So when they feel that they can openly lie to us, when they feel that they can rewrite stories and history to suit ideological purposes, that's when we know that we're entering into something very like tyranny. And that's almost the high point of tyranny, the reordering of facts to suit the agenda of the elites. That is the definition of tyranny, I would say. So we're entering into that world, and that's why I think it's a serious moment for all of us.
You quote the comedian Stuart Lee about political correctness, which is also very contested term, and it's not as widely used as it was, but he called it institutionalized politeness. And that's also like you can see people who are proud to say that they are politically correct. And why is Stuart Lee wrong that it's institutionalized politeness? And why are some people are they either they oppose the term or some people wear it proudly on their jacket, so to speak?
Yeah, I think he's completely wrong to call it political correctness, institutionalized politeness. I should say I'm very much in favor of politeness. I think being polite is very important, especially with kids. I love it when kids are polite. I always think they've got good parents. If you see a kid saying thank you, sorry, yes, I think that's a good sign. Shows they're being socialized in the right way. So I like politeness. It's a nice thing. But the question I always ask myself is, since when did politeness involve saying things you know not to be true? Since when did politeness mean saying her penis, or saying that the person who raped that woman is also a woman, literally a woman? You know, since when did politeness mean repeating mantras like trans women are women, which many of us simply do not believe? You know, you wouldn't go out there and stand in the streets and say Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse, because it's not true. I wouldn't, personally speaking, stand in the middle of the streets and say Jesus Christ walked on water, because I don't think that's true. And I say that as a former Roman Catholic, but a lapsed one, so I don't believe it's true. And similarly, I'm not going to stand on the streets and say trans women are women, because that's also a religious idea that has no basis in fact. And the fact that it's been turned into a mantra that you're supposed to repeat, almost like a Hare Krishna chant, I think is proof of its religious undertones. So politeness should not entail lying to oneself or lying to society. And politeness certainly should not entail feeling extraordinary pressure to say the right things, or else you'll be cancelled. That's not politeness, that's pressure. It's institutionalized pressure on people to believe and say the right things as decided by the rulers of society. You said earlier on a really important point about cancel culture, which is that its chief accomplishment is its trickle-down effect on society more broadly. So there are lots of people out there who don't get cancelled because they're not saying the thing that you're not supposed to say, because cancel culture has sent them a warning. And I think, you know, if you look at the big names like J.K. Rowling, for example, they will often say, well, she's not been cancelled. She's still earning loads of money. She's still writing her novels. She's still on Twitter. And I always think two things about that. First, I think there's an element of regret in these people's voices. They can't believe they haven't successfully destroyed this woman's life. They're so angry that they haven't successfully burnt the witch. So there's an element of regret when they say she hasn't been cancelled. But also, they're looking at it the wrong way. Their persecution of someone like J.K. Rowling sends a message to society more broadly. It says to women in particular on this issue, it says, listen, if even a billionaire, important cultural figure, can be harassed and threatened and told to suck my cock and threatened with rape and death almost every day for expressing biological facts, imagine what could happen to you. Imagine what we could do to you. The lowly woman who's just a receptionist or who works in a local supermarket or who's just a stay-at-home mum. Imagine what we could do to you if you go online and say women don't have penises. So it's a warning to society more broadly. And the point I would make, so I think you're completely right on what cancel culture does. And to call that politeness, I just think is another Orwellian disguise for what is actually very, very authoritarian.
And when it comes to J.K. Rowling, I would say that you can argue that she has indeed been cancelled. Because, I mean, they had like the reunion of all the actors in the Harry Potter movies. And there was just one tiny piece missing, the woman behind it all, who made it all possible for them and their fame and their fortunes and everything. But they thanked her by distancing themselves from her and her hateful speech. And I would also just like add that there's a curious twist when it comes to these issues, because what she started with, she supported another woman. And it was very like there was nothing hateful about what she tweeted, and like the amount of hate that she's received and threats and everything. And now then, when people are writing about her or talking about her in some more liberal or woke podcasts and articles, they say, oh, she has sometimes sounded angry. And why is she angry? And that's 3 years in or 4 years in. That's what happens to you if you get so threatened and you get so abused as she has been. Will you, at one point or another, become a little bit angry as well?
Yeah.
So you demand nothing of restraint from the activists who are harassing and are hectoring her and threatening her. You demand nothing from them or for the people who are calling for her cancellation, but you demand from her the patience of an angel.
Yeah.
And if she's strayed, I mean, I have not followed her like so closely, but if she strayed and sounded angry or even like something worth vengeful in one tweet or something, then that in this line of thinking, that sort of legitimizes retroactively all the threats and all the calls for cancellations. And this is sort of I want to hear your opinion on that as well, like this dynamic that if you're criticizing on these issues, it seems like it's very hard to, you can be right in the beginning, but if you like further down the road sort of sounded angry or you lose your patience, then you're out. Yeah. And the people on the other side, they can basically harass. And this is not really a question, this is sort of an observation, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a good one. And I think, they really hate apostates more than anything. Anyone who might have gone along with the trans idea, just to take that example again, but then who thinks it's going too far, or who starts to deviate from it in some way, they hate those people more than anyone. They will just be instantly cast out. And the thing about someone like J.K. Rowling is that she's been a fairly predictable liberal for a very long time. She's got all the views you would expect a wealthy member of the liberal elite to have. So, for example, on Brexit, she was very, very anti-Brexit. She was very much in favour of Remain, and she was a part of that what we call Ramonas, because they moan so much about Brexit. We call them Ramonas. She was one of those after 2006, after the referendum. So I would have been completely on the opposite side of her on that issue, because I was in favour of Brexit. I was in favour of us leaving the European Union. So she had on this issue, she just felt she couldn't go along with this aspect of liberal thought, supposedly liberal thought, because of the consequences it would have for women. And instantly she went from being a darling of the kind of leftish elites, a darling of the kind of bourgeois opinion forming classes, into being this satanic figure who had to be demonized all the time. It's an extraordinary shift. You will just be instantly demonized as soon as you deviate from any aspect of their ideology. But I think it's interesting that she, you're right, if any questioning from her side, if she does a tweet saying, I don't think men can be women, she's instantly accused of hate speech. She's a bigot. She's a transphobe. But the other side, who are saying to her, suck my girl dick, or I'm going to kill you, you fucking bitch. I mean, she gets things like that all the time. Someone posted a photograph of a bomb next to her home address on Twitter. And when she expressed solidarity with Salman Rushdie when he was stabbed by an Islamist last year, someone, in response to her tweet, someone said, don't worry, you're next. This is a daily phenomenon for her. And yet she's the one accused of hate speech, even though actually she's the one suffering from hate speech every single day. So it's another example of how these ideological constructs like hate speech, they're not actually factual descriptions of a certain form of speech. They're ideological weapons that are used against people who hold the wrong opinions. It's like calling someone a blasphemer. 500 years ago, you would have pointed at someone and said, you're a heretic, you're a blasphemer, we have to report you to the Inquisition. Now what you say is you're guilty of hate speech, you're a phobe, you're a transphobe, you're an Islamophobe, you're a homophobe. We have this new, in the book I call it a whole new grammar of censorship that is designed to demonize perfectly legitimate moral and political beliefs. So I find it, and there is a chapter in the book on hate speech, and I find it so fascinating that the people accused of hate speech are the people who are expressing reasonable, calm opinions, whereas the frothing mob of cancel culture is never referred to as hate speech, even though it is quite clearly hateful speech that is being used against wrong thinkers.
There are like certain cultural moments where the search for heretics becomes stronger, and Me Too was one of those moments, even if it's a mixed bag. But I remember people writing publicly that I can't believe Ivar Arpi isn't among the accused. I mean, look at him. Look at his views. I mean, there must be something. Let's get this motherfucker.
Wow.
And people were really trying. And it's, I mean, I felt like you heard that quote. I don't mind being called a Nazi because nobody has sexual fantasies of being ravaged by a liberal. So I sort of felt like that a little bit. Like, it's okay if you think I look the part of being a part of Me Too, but I'm not. But just like the search, and you feel like now it's time to get out all the political opponents. Let's do away with the resistance. There was no concern for women in that, what they said. There was no concern with like, okay, we have people who are repeating or doing abuse or defending abuse. It was just, some of it was just very vindictive, and it sort of feels there's that, like, you get sort of the righteous fervor with one that you can see that people chasing heretics. And we just want to get to the, because you said that you were lapsed Catholic, and I applaud that as a Protestant. No, but the image of the heretic. Why did you pick that? And you also, like, it's a theme for the book as well. Like you pick up on the religious qualities. On now we've basically been talking about the trans issue mostly, but there's in the book you go through a variety of issues that are very central to what you can call the culture war, or the awakening, and but why did you pick a heretic as a symbol?
Well, that's a good question. Heretic is a very grand term in some ways. You have to be a bit arrogant to call yourself a heretic and to put yourself in the line of, all those great heroes of history who got burnt at the stake simply for translating the Bible.
You should have called it the Arrogant Manifesto.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I should have done. So it's a very grand title to take on oneself. But I think one of the reasons I did it is I really don't like the contrarian. I get called a contrarian all the time. I'm sure you do as well. If they have a similar term in Sweden, I don't like it. I've never liked it. I mean, I don't lose any sleep over it. It's not as if I feel insulted, but the thing I don't like about the term contrarian is that it makes it sound like you're only saying something to get on people's nerves. You're only writing this column, or you're only saying this thing on TV because you want to irritate, you want to own the liberals, you want to irritate the chattering classes. Contrarian suggests a slightly mechanical judgment about what will irritate people. And for me, that's not the case. Of course, all of us might have a certain writing style that is designed to be confrontational and designed to be argumentative. People often say my writing style is very acerbic. It's quite direct. So that's true. But everything I write, I completely believe. I've never once written anything that I didn't, in that moment, believe completely. And if other people think it's contrarianism, that's on them rather than on me. So I hate the term contrarian, but I love the term heretic, because I do think one of the points I make in my book is that pretty much every freedom and comfort and piece of knowledge we enjoy today is a gift of heresy. It is a gift from people in the past who were willing to think in a heretical fashion and who even put their lives on the line. And I tell the story of some of those people in the book, especially in the last chapter. William Tyndale is one of my heroes. You mentioned being a Protestant, so you'll be very fond of William Tyndale. He was an early, zealous Protestant reformer in England in the early 1500s, who committed the grave offence of translating the Bible into English, which was an offence punishable by death. The Bible was only supposed to be in Latin because it was only the clever priestly classes who were allowed to read it. The plebs weren't allowed to look at it themselves. And he said, no, I trust ordinary people. I think they can have the Bible. They're sensible. They know what they're doing. So that was seen as a threat to the entire...
That's hate speech, I would say.
Yeah, that's right.
He should be cancelled.
That's exactly what the church said. This is horrible. This is hateful. This is damaging. This is wounding our self-esteem. So they did all of that in their whatever language they used back then, and they hunted him across Europe. He had to go to Germany, of course, to publish his Bible, and it was kind of smuggled back into England in boxes of grain, and then given out to his supporters, who had to read it in the dark in case anyone came knocking on the door. And I give that as an example of, I think not enough people know who William Tyndale is. There's a statue of him on the Embankment in London. And whenever I walk past it with friends, I always say, do you know who this man is? Do you know what he did for us? Because if he hadn't done this, and then he was eventually caught and strangled to death by rope, and after that he was burnt at the stake.
Oh, you...
Det är festivalsäsong och det betyder massor av lera. Så Alex surfade in på Amazon för att hitta ett tält som rymmer upp till 5 torra vänner, en mysig campingsäng, skön, och leopardmönstrade gummistövlar. Miau! Nu får Alex hantera precis lagom mycket lera för att vara Alex, vilket är betydligt mindre lera än för den där leriga dansande mannen där borta. Men vänta, har han bara lera på sig? Japp, bara lera. Håll dig torr, får det att hända. Hitta det på amazon.se.
Upptäck Ford e-Custom, elversionen av Europas mest sålda transportbil. Den har upp till 370 kilometers räckvidd, snabbladdning och finns nu med 4-hjulsdrift. Just nu till Ford Pro Edition-pris från 479 000 ex-moms. Läs mer på Ford.se eller besök din Ford återförsäljare. Ready, set, Ford.
Tänk om din plånbok kunde prata. Vad skulle den då säga om din relation till ekonomi?
Alla relationer har ju sina ups and downs, men att han har lån lite här och där, det tror jag skulle vara en ick för rätt många plånböcker och inte bara för mig.
Ett första steg mot en bättre relation till sin plånbok kan vara att samla sina lån.
Samla dina lån till ett på lendo.se.
You can't be too sure.
Yeah, just to make doubly sure that this guy was never going to be offensive again. They had to, double killing.
Yeah.
And it's just a good example of why heresy is so important to civilization. Because if he hadn't done that, I mean, someone else would have eventually, I guess. But when he did that, it changed everything. Because not only did it piss off the church and cause lots of conflict, but it gave rise to the idea that people should be able to read and judge things for themselves. I mean, as you will know from the history of Protestantism, it is in many ways the birth of freedom of conscience, the beginning point of the freedom of the mind, at least. Freedom of speech tends to come a little bit later, but the freedom of the mind and freedom of conscience. And if they hadn't done that, if they hadn't risked their lives, if they haven't died for those things, we would not enjoy all the freedoms that we do today. So that's why I use the term heretic, because heretics are so important to the progress of society. And that's why I think we need more of them right now.
I would also, Tyndale is a minor character in the amazing trilogy by Hilary Mantel, the late Hilary Mantel, Wolf Hall, and the main character, Cromwell, he's one of the storylines is of his Protestantism, and it's of course before the Reformation. So if one wants to, I really highly recommend those books, and it's a very interesting storyline to follow along in the religious context, the conflict within the church and everything. But I would say also that the heretic, as you say, I was going to bring up the contrarian term because it implies immaturity. I mean, it's like the kids game, like when you just one is like you repeat what my oldest kids are doing this to me now. They're 6 and 8, and sometimes they just get in their head they're going to repeat what we say to them, and it's super annoying. And one is to just say the opposite, I'm the opposite. I'm the opposite. It's very stupid. But what you bring out with your examples, and I really appreciate this in the book with your historical examples, is that there wasn't a immaturity or sort of a puberty thing, like you said, something that the church didn't agree with. It was as with the case with Immanuel Kant and many others. Some of them weren't labeled heretics, but they had a sincere search for truth. And if you're lucky, in some periods of time, that will not land you in a position of heresy. I mean, you can actually be lucky and sometimes live in a time where the pursuit of truth and the moral good and being in line with, you feel like you are actually in line with sort of the society. But many times, if you are earnest in your search for truth, as you show in the book, you will sooner or later, or you might risk being labeled a heretic. But it's not something in and of itself good. It's just something that the orthodoxy labels you because you, as you say with the case of Tyndale, he threatened the power of the church, of the institutions. Okay, but if the layman can read the Bible in English, well, why should we, what will happen to the authority of the priest? What will happen, and so that's why I think also that it's a sometimes you diminish a writer such as yourself by calling them contrarian, even when you're friendly, in a friendly, hey, you're a contrarian. I like contrarians. Yes, but it's not really. That's not where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I agree with that. It does imply childishness or a kind of juvenile approach when you call someone a contrarian. You know, you're just the naughty kid at the back of the class making noise. That's the implication that it has. I really don't like that, because I think what we're going through now is very serious. It doesn't mean we can't make fun of it and have a laugh about it. And I try to do that in the book as well. And I know you do that too, kind of poking these things and making fun of them, because very often that's what they deserve, as well as talking very seriously about what's going on. But contrarianism, I think it's another way to kind of shut people down. You know, you're phobic, you're a bigot, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're a contrarian, you're just saying this to be annoying. All of these are ways of, actually, they're ways of saying the orthodoxy is so perfect and so beautiful and so unworthy of being rebuked or criticized, because it is kind of so glossy and wonderful, that any criticism of it must come from a bad starting point. Any criticism of the new orthodoxies has got to be motored by bad faith or contrarian fun or bigotry or phobia, because there's no other reason you would criticize it. So that's really what they're saying. What they're saying is the way that we think and the way that we organize society is so beyond criticism that we are very, very suspicious of anyone who puts forward a criticism. That's what they mean when they call us contrarians or phobics or conspiracy theorists or whatever else it might be. So, yeah, I think the point you make there about heresy as well is really important, which is that it is sometimes bad that people are called heretics. I mean, it's usually always bad, in fact. You know, in the past in particular, you know, the Catholic Church has institutions that are devoted to destroying heresy. I mean, it still exists. I think it's called the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith or something. It's the institution that Pope Benedict was in charge of when he was Joseph Ratzinger, and then he became Pope. I'm a big fan of Pope Benedict, by the way. People can read my essay about him after he died. He was a great critic of relativism and a great defender of truth and objectivity. But yeah, most of the time, branding people heretics is not a good thing. It's a bad thing. It means that they're about to be punished, sometimes violently. And around the world, that still happens. If you look at Iran, we just passed the first anniversary of the hijab revolt, which I think was one of the most inspiring revolts of recent times to take place anywhere in the world.
I strongly condemn your speech here. It's what you're saying here. It's a blatant case of hijabophobia.
Hijabophobia, right?
Yeah. So all the Islamophobes in Iran congregated and celebrated how their hatefulness, and it's good that the regime there is standing up against hijabophobia and put them in jail. And we can't have that much hate on the streets. No,
it's really
true. I'm quoting your chapter on Islamophobia and Islam here and how we talk about these issues, because that would have basically been how we described it. If something like that took place on the streets of Sweden or Britain, and people were burning the hijab and like throwing away, like, people would see it as hateful.
Yeah, absolutely. There is no question about that whatsoever. Same in London. If that happened in London, people would say it was Islamophobic. And yeah, in that chapter, that's the chapter on Islamo-censorship. And I talk about this new phrase. We all know the phrase Islamophobia, which I think is an incredibly problematic phrase. I hate bigotry of all kinds, and that includes bigotry against Black people, against women, against Muslims, against Catholics, against Irish, whoever it is. Bigotry is bad. But Islamophobia...
it was just chance that you brought up Irish and Catholics, the two categories that you self belong to. Like, by chance, like, don't be hateful, people.
Just a coincidence. But Islamophobia is something completely different, because Islamophobia is so explicitly about protecting Islam and its beliefs and practices from any kind of criticism. It's a new form of blasphemy law that is used to control discussion of a world religion, which is utterly an unacceptable thing to do in a free society, to control what people say about a religion. But I think one of the points I make in that chapter is there's a new term, a secondary term to Islamophobia, called hijabophobia. And I'm not making this up. This is a real term. It's in the Oxford Handbook on Islam. It's been used in actual publications. The Huffington Post did a piece a couple of years ago on hijabophobia. The European Union talks about hijabophobia. And hijabophobia is loathing of the hijab or hostility. The Huffington Post calls it hostility to the hijab. So I just make the point that this revolt in Iran was clearly an exercise in hijabophobia. This was an outburst of Islamophobia. That's how we are encouraged to see it implicitly. But of course, what it really was a wonderful strike for freedom that brought together both sexes, mostly young people, many of whom were slaughtered in the streets. Hundreds of them were slaughtered in the streets. Many more were imprisoned. Some have been executed. And the silence, the relative silence from supposedly woke, socially just activists in the West has been sickening, actually. There's no other word for it. These are the people who blacked out their Instagram pages for George Floyd, you know, a criminal who was murdered by a cop in Minneapolis, which, by the way, was a shocking event, and he should not have been treated in that way, and he certainly should not have been killed. But they blacked out their pages for him. They went on marches for him. All the big businesses in the world issued statements about white supremacy. You had bankers and politicians taking the knee, and footballers in England are still taking the knee for George Floyd, who died, 3 years ago in 4,000 miles away. They didn't say a word for the hundreds of women and men who were killed by cops in Iran. Not a word. No big business has said anything. I don't see anyone blacking out their Instagram pages. There haven't been marches. You know, do Iranian lives matter? Apparently not. Do women's lives matter? It seems they don't. So the hypocrisy is astonishing. And that, I think, is a good sign of where censorship gets you. Because we've had a culture of censorship around Islam in Western Europe for the past 20 or 30 years. And it's frazzled people's minds. You think about the young generation in particular, the ones who are on social media making all their woke statements, 17, 18, 19-year-olds. These are kids who are brought up in schools that have education. In the UK, they have Islamophobia awareness in schools. They have hijab awareness. These are kids who will have been brought up to watching celebrities saying, we love the hijab, all of that. And so actually makes it impossible for them to say anything about the Iranian revolt. They are lost for words. There is nothing they can say which won't break the rules of Islamophobia. There is nothing that you can... It's very hard to be positive about the revolt in Iran without breaking the speech codes of Islamophobia. So censorship, excuse my language, it fucks up everything, including people's own minds, because they are unable to appreciate a revolt for freedom because their minds have been frazzled into thinking that it's phobic and prejudiced. So Islamophobia is such a dangerous idea, and it's one that really needs to be challenged.
We had an incident. An incident is the wrong word. We're living through a period in Sweden where we're trying to join NATO, and Turkey, not Turkey, Turkey. They are blocking us, and because they want us to basically bend the knee in a low, different kinds of ways, and we have a lot of a large Kurdish minority, and of course the Turkish regime are fighting with the PKK, and So in any case, we have our prime minister and the government and the opposition are agreeing that this is the worst security situation for Sweden since Second World War. But they're always mixing. I mean, Russia, yes, but now they're also talking about Islam and Islamism and extremism. We're so dangerous because the embassy in Iraq was stormed. I'm not trying to diminish the threats here, but the Islamists in Sweden right now are not the most dangerous that we've had since Second World War. We need a lot more terrorism. To go back to Ireland, I usually compare to Ireland. You talked to, I think it was you who, I can't remember his name. On your podcast, you interviewed a Northern Irish writer who lives in France, and he's a staff writer on Charlie Hebdo. And he basically said that when he grew up in Belfast, I think it was, like, they heard a bomb go off, and it was like, was that down on Queen Street? Or no, it's further down the road. And then back to normal. I mean, it's an exaggeration, but that's what for me, that's like a tough situation. 2 terrorist attacks in 10 years is not 13 years. It's not like we are living under the shadow of the sword. It's not like that. But in any case, we have an Iranian exile woman, Sadaf Ahmadi, and she has made. She came here 3 years ago, and I think it was because of the censorship in Iran. She was a filmmaker, and it's getting worse, and so she's a political refugee from Iran, and she made she was going to do an art exhibition in Borås, a small city outside of Gothenburg, and but the municipality cancelled the art exhibition because it might ruffle the wrong feathers. And if you see the art, it's so far from being offensive. It's women in chador, I mean the Iranian version of the hijab, in concrete, and you just see the face, and they're hanging from the ceiling. So the rope symbolizes they're trying to ascend, like spiritually, intellectually, but they're being dragged down by the chador.
Yeah.
So they canceled her exhibition, and she's. I interviewed her, and I just said, like, the ironic thing is that it's not surprising to me, because I've followed the debates here in the West, but you came here and you saw what we said about freedom of expression, all the freedoms that we talk about, and all the human rights we talk about, and you thought that we were serious, while I know that we're not. And it's this kind of censorship is it gets apparent when somebody didn't get the memo.
Yeah, I really agree with that, and it's like we're doing the mullah's dirty work for them. You know, the West has made itself a willing outpost of Iranian-style censorship, and it's, you know, the commonalities between Iranian censorship of blasphemy and Western censorship of Islamophobia are extraordinary. As you say, there's the case of the artist who is now as likely to be censored in the West for causing offense as she is to be censored in Iran for blaspheming against Allah or Muhammad or whatever. So it's the same thing. It's just different language. It's like I make the point in that chapter on Islamo censorship. I make the point that there's a gymnast in the UK called Louis Smith, very well known sportsman, medal winner, etc. He was suspended from his sport for 2 months, I think, because a video emerged in which he was saying something funny about Islam. He was drunk at a party and he was saying, I'm going to pray to Allah because I want to get my 67 virgins. He meant 72. He got the number wrong. He meant, he wanted 72 women. He was drunk. He was making fun. He had to, or maybe he
had to subtract 5 virgins because he knew that he was drunk. So, like, it's a punishment. Right. You only get 67.
Yeah. You have to have some taken away. And he had to issue a groveling public retraction. I was reading his retraction thinking, God, what century are we living in that someone has to issue a kind of recant their blasphemous beliefs? And then he was suspended from his sport for 2 months. And then after that, he started to receive death threats. Someone messaged him saying, we're going to throw acid on you. We're going to murder you. And I remember making the point at the time that it's the same as what happens in Iran. It's the same thing. You know, he's not going to be whipped in the public square. He's not going to be put in prison for 5 years, but he is being punished for criticizing Islam. So it's on the spectrum with what happens in Iran. So the fact that we've institutionalized this stuff is terrifying. And it seems to me that we've internalized the fatwa. You know, if you look at the Salman Rushdie affair, when that fatwa was first introduced in 1989, after the book was published in 1988, Lots of Western liberals were incredibly cowardly, refused to stand shoulder to shoulder with Salman Rushdie and said he needs to shut up if he doesn't want to be attacked. But other people were shocked that a death threat could be issued against a writer in the 20th century. But what's happened since then is that the fatwa has won. It is now broadly accepted in polite society in the West, in Sweden, in the UK, even in parts of the United States. It's broadly accepted that it's wrong to criticize Islam, that some form of consequence must be visited upon people who criticize Islam, whether it's being blacklisted from a university campus or accused of Islamophobia or suspended from their job, or in the extreme versions, massacred in their offices. That's what happened with Charlie Hebdo. The fatwa has won. We now accept that there must be a punishing consequence for criticizing Islam. So it's very disturbing to me that over the past 30 years, the mullah's view of what you can say about Islam now has been elevated above Salman Rushdie's more liberal view. And that should give everyone pause for thought about what's gone wrong in our societies, I think.
One last question is, you have a chapter on white shame, and just like, of course, the Black Lives Matter movement was very, it's astonishing that the football players in Britain still bend the knee. And is it because they sort of, we can sort of integrate what happened on the other side of the ocean? I've never even visited the United States, but of course I'm inundated. I live in the United States to a degree. And so we feel a responsibility for everything that people who are white have done historically and are doing anywhere in the world. And we have a very hard time feeling then that we are the protesters in Iran, for example. They are not part of us. Yeah. But we are all standing with the knee on George Floyd's neck, so we have to bend the knee. It's, as you bring up, I have a friend who's very into computer gaming, and during the Black Lives Matter movement, there was speaking on debating on forums, and very soon there were woke. Some forums were taken over by woke people, and other people fled to other forums. But he quoted Martin Luther King, I think, and that was basically to label himself a racist. It was everybody started laughing at him, oh, don't bring up that crap, you're racist. And it's sort of strange if you lived longer than 5 minutes to go from because that was anti-racism, but now it's it's a shorthand for racism, basically, try to be colorblind or.
Yeah, it's really true. And you make a really important point there about the question of why we can empathize with African Americans who are suffering police brutality, but we can't for young Iranian women and young Iranian men who are suffering police brutality, even though the African American in question here was a petty criminal, which, by the way, I don't think justifies any maltreatment at all. Whereas the men and women in Iran who've been killed in their hundreds are ordinary citizens asking for more freedom. It's such an interesting question. And I think one of the things is that you mentioned Black Lives Matter. You mentioned living in America in your mind. And I think that's probably the feeling lots of us have. And sometimes I want to try and liberate myself from the American way of life. I love America, by the way. I'm a huge fan. I love going there. I love what it symbolizes. I love the First Amendment. I love its history. I love the fact that they kicked Britain out. I love all of it. But
again, it shows. Your last name shows.
Yeah, right. I'm a big fan of people kicking Brits out of their country. But it's, its soft cultural power is starting to concern me, actually. And I think Black Lives Matter was a good example of that. The great irony of Black Lives Matter is it presents itself as this kind of anti-racist, anti-colonial, anti-capitalist machine. But in fact, I think it is probably modern Imperial America's most successful cultural export. And it rolled across the world like a juggernaut, promoted by the billionaires of Silicon Valley, the celebrity elites, the cultural establishment, the political establishment. It rolled across the world to such an extent that the only way in which protesters in Belgium could express themselves for a period of time was through the slogan Black Lives Matter. There were protests in Belgium, same in the UK, same in Australia. In Australia, Aboriginal rights campaigners started to use the phrase Black Lives Matter. It's like this cultural export from America colonized whole countries and whole people's minds and people's way of thinking and everything. So it was a very successful export of one of the most poisonous aspects of modern America, which is identity politics. So I saw it as identity politics' conquest of the world. It was neo-colonial project dressed up as an anti-colonial movement. So I found Black Lives Matter very worrying. And the fact that you still have people outside of the US taking the knee, really they're taking the knee to the new American religion of identity politics. That's what's happening. This is people bowing down to the empire of correct thought as defined by influential people on the east and west coasts of the United States. So I found that incredibly worrying. And I think if, the fact that we can't offer solidarity to freedom fighters in Iran, but we can offer solidarity to identitarian activists in America, that really suggests that this movement, wokeness, social justice, whatever we're calling it, it's not really about freedom. It's not really about supporting oppressed peoples. It's about having the correct opinions. It's about literally genuflecting to the correct ideas, literally bending the knee to the new rulers of the cultural establishment. It's not about supporting oppressed groups. And, one of the points I make in my book, and I've made it before, if you criticize wokeness, if you criticize political correctness, people think you must be some old white man who wants to go back to the 1950s when women were in the kitchen and black people weren't allowed into the dine and whatever, and whatever else it is. For me, it's the opposite of all of that. I see wokeness primarily as a threat to the progressive steps forward that our society's made over the past 50 years. I see it as a threat to the Martin Luther King view of the world. And in fact, on some American campuses now, it's now described as a microaggression to say that character matters more than color. So we have the distinct possibility that if Martin Luther King was alive today, he would be no platformed from some American universities for elevating character over color. Because the argument you're supposed to make now is that one's racial experience is the most important thing about that person. So all of the positive, interesting, liberal steps forward that we've all benefited from are being undone by woke hysteria, by the re-racialization of politics, the reintroduction of misogynistic thinking, the protection of religion from criticism. All of these regressive developments are harming freedom in our societies. And that's why I think we need more heretics to put their heads up and say, enough is enough.
And this is a central point in your book that I think is not done often enough. And you quote Kant, like in his 1784 essay, What is Enlightenment? You write, he raged against those who would tell us what to think and how to exist. He complained of having a book that thinks for me, a pastor who acts as my conscience, a physician who prescribes my diet, all of which means I have no need to exert myself. These guardians, he said, treat us like cattle, making us view the step to maturity not only as hard, but also as extremely dangerous. The solution to such harmful meddling? Ignore it. Walk firmly and cultivate your own mind, said Kant. Have the courage to use your own understanding. And this is like a central point. And I would just, I'm from a Protestant culture, so of course this is a point I would make, that many of the Protestants didn't view the Catholic Church only as another way to perceive God. They viewed it as the Church of Antichrist. This is a church stands between you and God. This is a church that's been raised to enrich a few, and to obscure the view. And what you're saying and what Kant was saying is that, like, make up your own, have the courage to make up your own mind, and don't just bow down, take the knee to new orthodoxy. It's not that, I mean, like, sometimes when you use the word, not you, but when one uses the word religion, it's like always bad. But it's not like that. It's the blind faith.
Yeah.
When you're not using your own mind and like just trusting somebody else to do, like, deciding for you, and you just go along with it. And that's like, that's why what I take away, a lot of what I take away from your book, like, being a heretic is actually trusting your own eyes and daring to speak for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, summed it better than I could. I think that's right. And I would encourage everyone to read What is Enlightenment by Kant. It's really short. It's like a little article. Kant can be very, very difficult to understand. Some of his books is like, oh my God, this is stressing out my brain. But What is Enlightenment is so simple and clear cut. It could be published in a newspaper today. I mean, it's extraordinary. He basically says he's sick of having all these strings tied to him by people who think they know better than us, what you should eat, how you should think, how you should behave. And he calls, as you say, he calls them guardians, these guardians who want to lead you through life. And his point is, the more that you give into that, the more that you accept the right of these people to tell you what to do and what to think, the weaker your own moral muscles become. Because if you don't use, it's like your physical muscles. I think John Milton made this point. If you don't use your physical muscles, they go to waste. It's the same with your mental muscles and your moral muscles. If you don't use them, if you don't make up your own mind, if you don't decide for yourself what is right and what is wrong, who is interesting and who is not, if you don't make these judgments, your moral and mental muscles go to waste as well. And you become someone who is only capable of receiving the truth from outside, from someone who apparently knows better. So, yeah, exercising our own moral muscles and making judgments for ourselves, rejecting censorship in all its forms on the basis that no one should ever tell us what we are allowed to see or allowed to hear. That's so important, I think, in order to be a fully rounded, truly independent human being who is able to think for himself, to engage with other people, and to decide what should happen with his own life and with society. That's what I mean by a heretic. Stand on your own 2 feet and walk firmly and use your own moral reason.
Thank you, Brendan O'Neill, for being part of Rak Höger. Och stort tack till dig som har lyssnat. Gå gärna in och skriv en recension på Apple Podcasts eller i den app där du lyssnar på podden. Och detta är alltså en del av en större publikation på Substack med samma namn som podden. Och den som prenumererar där kan även ta del av de texter jag skriver. Gillar man det man läser och hör får man gärna bli betalande prenumerant för 5 euro i månaden eller 50 om året. Då får man ta del av lite exklusivt extra material också. Du hittar rubbet på ivararpi.se. Och har du några frågor eller synpunkter kan du alltid mejla mig på ivararpi@substack.com. Vi hörs igen.